Welcome back. Today we're going to talk about AzStudio's built-in SMTP support. So let's go ahead and call it up with email. Let's go into the CAS actually and do that. All right, great. So SMTP is pretty straightforward. We just have accounts, mappings, links, and shortcuts, plus a queue. Please see our videos about storage queues in another video on how to set up and manage a storage queue. We'll reference it, but we're not going to talk in any great detail about it. Additionally, we have a background worker which actually sends the emails out. That's also covered in another video about workers. Simply see our playlist for that video. What we're going to talk today about is how do we actually set up an SMTP account? How do we map it to a relay, and then how do we link that to that and create a shortcut? So the first step is to set up an SMTP account. You do this normally with any SMTP server out there. We happen to use Mandrill for our test accounts. That Mandrill happens to be MailChimp's transactional email service. You're going to need three things. You're going to need an SMTP password, a server, and a username. And additionally, you have to make sure that that information is encrypted using the encrypt function. So once you have your account, and you may set up a separate account for each environment. You may, in this case, we're just going to use one email account for all of our environments. It really doesn't matter. What does matter is that you have this information in here and that you have a name for it. All right, so the next thing you'll do is you'll create an SMTP mapping. Basically, you're telling the system if there's an environment that the system is running in, and we want to use this account when you're running in this environment. If you have separate accounts for each environment, then of course these names here would be more of them. Don't worry so much about the federation segments. The queuing systems generally handle that for you. However, if you have really large outbound transactional email volume, things can be federated so that you can send them out through different pipelines automatically. You could have 10 different queues and 20 different workers delivering things to Mandrill so that it can be outbound as fast as possible. Only our larger clients have any need for the federation segments, though. The next thing you're going to do is set up an SMTP shortcut. This is just a name. You don't have any context of what environment you're running in, because remember, AzStudio is all about runtime context. You don't have to worry about it. You just have to create an email shortcut. You can have as many of these as you want, and you can set the pipelines up however you want. The last step is to create, the last step of initializing things is to create your shortcut mapping links. And this is to say, hey, these three SMTP shortcuts are going to use these three mappings for dev, production, and QA. If I had a different shortcut name and I wanted to use a different account, then you'd map them here. If your shortcut isn't mapped to these different routing sets, then you won't be able to route out to the different email emitters. All right, so you've configured your email shortcuts and you've bound your external email SMTP accounts, and everything looks great. So now it's time to actually bind the actual web job to a queue so that you can just deposit things in a queue and have them automatically processed for outbound email. The way you handle that is you create a queue shortcut to get the full information about how to set up a shortcut. Just see our video list. There's tons of examples. Plus, in our VM training, where we actually go into this in great detail. But in this case, we have SMTP email, and we have a queue that's being bound to that, and it's transactional queues. Once you've got that shortcut in place, your code can now talk to the queue. After that, everything runs pretty smoothly. Now at this point, you would, if you're using our default workers, you would deploy, well, actually, it's probably already deployed for you, the worker host, which is in a web job application, and the SMTP worker would already be deployed as part of that. If it's not, then you'll need to deploy some worker listening to that queue that's capable of sending SMTP messages into an outbound service. We have all of that already arranged for you, and our provisioning wizard will automatically use PowerShell and take care of all of that for you. If you want detailed instructions on how to set up the worker host and how that SMTP worker can be deployed, you need to go through our training. Our training videos will take you straight through that. If you want to test the system, simply tell it to open the SMTP worker test harness, and you'll see you come up with a very basic tester, and the tester is built to emulate our hosting technology, our worker host technology. We have another video that goes into detail about worker host, but suffice it to say, it's a host process that can load multiple non-visual plugins and run them sequentially. One of those plugins that we have already written for you is direct email. So we'll send a direct email test to SMTP email and hit OK, and it's going to ask you where your email is coming from. Now, I'm not going to fill this out because I don't want to give you my information, but basically your outbound email has to come from a registered domain. It has to be a correct sender. Usually it's like no reply at yourdomain.com, some recipient, and then this will automatically test the email message. Sending an email message works the same way, except it's going to enqueue the message object and send it, and then be processed later by the background worker. Let's show you how that works in code, which will make things more clear. So let's talk about sending the email in code, which is pretty easy. We already have a model email queue item, which you fill out, and then you get the reference to the queue, which is SMTP email, and you enqueue it. That's all you have to do. If the model is placed on the queue, then that means that the sender is going to automatically process that email. And it already has the logic in it for a number of retries, whether it's sent well or not, whether what was the result back from the mandrel sending system, etc., etc. There's also some log viewers that you can look at for reviewing the send log of this SMTP email, which we'll look at in a second. The big idea here is that you enqueue your email and it eventually gets worked on by a background worker. So you've already got your processes decoupled, and sending an email couldn't be simpler. If you want to use something besides mandrel email, say SendGrid or a notification hub or something, or Twilio, then you're going to have to write a different worker to handle this body or this email message. But that's a really simple thing to do, and is covered in our workers tutorial. To view a log of all the transactions that your email worker has done, we simply go into the SMTP History Explorer, and right now, well, of course, this is a demo. There's no details about this, but if the outbound email had been processed, it will be here with the recipient, subject, and details. This is also the table that you would go to in SQL if you wanted to create retry logic beyond what we already have. If you want to implement special notifications, if the details show that there was a failure in send or it was bounced. Beyond that point, we're not really here to do things like what percent were opened, what was the rejection reason, that kind of thing. Usually your SMTP service that you're connected to will manage that information for you. It'll also keep track of things like who received the email, who bounced it, who opened it, etc., etc. On that side of things. This gets you a quick and dirty SMTP system up and running, and also scales a bit for our larger clients. And how you manage that information outside of it is really going to be custom work. Thanks for listening.